I am about to throw a stone at one of the biggest Goliaths in global finance, and the ripple that it makes might be worth $1,000 a pop. What if the world's $5 trillion a day money highway got hijacked by a coin that settles faster than you can blink? Imagine you're waiting in line at the bank, and the teller still kind of taps in the same dusty mainframe that your grandparents kind of sniffed back in the 70s. That's basically Swift, right? A global fax machine that, shuffles messages between 11,000 plus banks, moving roughly $1.25 quadrillion a year. Now, picture Patrick Bet-David, right? The slick talking entrepreneur whose YouTube studio looks like the Batcave of finance, sliding in and saying, hey, what if XRP replaced the entire cranky system? Now, on his kind of value estimations show in March, he didn't just kind of spitball. He actually crunched the numbers. Even if XRP grabs only 10% of Swift's flow, that's about $125 trillion a year, the coin's market cap could swell to tens trillion dollars, right? Driving the price to roughly a $100 price tag each. And if XRP muscles in for the whole pie, well, some analysts kind of shout four-figure dreams, $1,000 per token. Sure, a little moon boy hype never hurt any YouTuber views, right? But Bet-David's point is simple, right? This tech is already clearing payments in 3 to 5 seconds for a fraction of a cent, while Swift crawls like dial-up internet and charges a hefty toll. I'll never forget the first time that I tried to wire money overseas. My bank clerk shoved a form under the glass, asked for an IBAN, a BIC, right, my dog's maiden name, and then kind of blurted, it'll take 3 to 5 business days. 3 to 5 days. Now, XRP does it in the time that it takes to double tap a selfie, right? And Ripple's CEO, Brad Garlinghouse, has receipts. He says that XRP's error rate is a tiny 0.1% versus Swift's 6% misfire rate. Now, that means if Swift were a kind of package courier, one box out of every 6 would end up on the wrong porch. That's a nightmare, especially when the box happens to contain millions in corporate payroll. Meanwhile, of course, Ripple's senior VP Eric Van Mittenberg, called the whole thing out at Davos this April, branding Ripple a modern upgrade for cross-border payments. And if you've ever kind of screamed at a kind of buffering screen when your Wi-Fi stutters, well, you already understand why banks are screaming for an upgrade too. But here is the elephant dancing in the room, the SEC lawsuit. For 4 long years, the US Securities and Exchange Commission took Ripple to court, arguing that XRP was an unregistered security. Now that cloud kind of scared off big US institutions faster than a dentist's drill, right? Bet-David himself said that the lawsuit is kind of a handbrake on mass adoption. Yet, plot twist, regulatory skies may finally be clearing. Last month, Business Insider blasted out a headline saying that the SEC has dropped its case, and XRP popped nearly 14% in minutes. Now, Barron echoed, the same story, noting XRP spiked to almost $2.56 the day that Garlinghouse announced the news. Now, lawyers are still trying to tie up loose knots, right? They're talking of appeal pauses and settlement paperwork, but the market kind of smells victory here. Now, picture XRP as the sprinter who's had one ankle shackled. Take the shackle off and, well, let's see how fast those legs can really move. And so, what's the challenge? Well, even if the lawsuit truly does end, convincing the world's cautious mega banks to flip the switch from Swift, won't actually happen overnight, right? Financial plumbing is like an old city, right? Every pipe is welded into 1,000 basements. and nobody wants to kind of break concrete unless new pipe guarantees no leaks, right? But Ripple's kind of patch, or at least pitch, I should say, is compelling, right? Near instant finality, pennies to the dollar savings, and carbon light footprints that make ESG committees swoon. Now, FedNow, the US instant payment rail, could theoretically plug XRP under the hood. 𝗕𝗪𝗪 floated that scenario too. Now, if that happens, imagine every Venmo, payroll, and treasury transaction kind of zooming through a ledger that settles before your coffee is even brewed. So let's go and play out 𝗕𝗪𝗪's math for a second. 10% of Swift's yearly $1.25 quadrillion processed through XRP equates to $125 trillion. Right? Now, divide that by the current flow of roughly 100 billion XRP and boom, $1,250 per coin. Now, 𝗕𝗪𝗪 dialed that down a mere conservative $100 by factoring in liquidity, velocity, and the stash of coins still locked in Ripple's escrow. Right? Critics kind of scream, that's impossible. But critics once laughed at a teenager live streaming video games, and now Twitch inflows billions of dollars, right? Disruption never asks for permission. It just kicks the damn door down and rearranges the furniture. Banks demand bulletproof compliance, right? Regulators worry about illicit flows, and some analysts point out that Swift's isn't just kind of snail mail, it's actually a messaging layer. Right? Now, liquidity still moves via correspondent accounts, so replacing Swift means replacing deep-rooted habits. But XRP's advantage is that it can be the liquidity, right? Instead of banks pre-funding accounts around the world, they would simply convert fiat to XRP for 2 seconds, zap value across the planet, and cash out on the other side. Right? Less trapped capital, less risk. It's kind of like turning old school layovers into, well, direct flights. I tried a micro experiment recently as well. Sent $20 worth of XRP from my phone to a friend in Australia while we were on a Zoom call. Now, by the time that he had finished saying good day, right, the XRP hit his wallet. Now, we kind of screen shared, swapped it straight from Aussie dollars on ramp, and the fee? Well, I've spent more feeding a parking meter. And that's the kind of aha moment that kind of turns skeptics into kind of, long-term loyalists. And if you want more stories like that, slide into our free crypto Discord. There's a link in the description down below, because we geek out over real-world tests, trading setups, and, rants about everyday life. And here's another twist, right? Ripple's on-demand liquidity already partners with banks in Japan, the Philippines, Mexico, and dozens of other corridors, right? It's quietly chewing through Swift's sandwich at the edges. And think Netflix shipping DVDs before streaming kind of crushed Blockbuster. Now, by the time Blockbuster blinked, the game was over. Now, Swift's kind of brass sees the threat, right? Just last year, they actually launched pilot programs with CBDCs to at least stay relevant. Good luck outrunning innovation with a committee, though. Still, let's not kid ourselves. Price predictions can go haywire. In 2017, Bitcoin soared 20-fold, then kind of nosedived 80%. Markets overcorrect in both directions. If XRP ever kind of sniffed $100, the market cap would dwarf Apple, Saudi, Aramco, and Microsoft combined at today's numbers. Now, that only kind of makes sense if XRP kind of functions as a kind of real-time bridge asset for trillions of dollars in daily flows, not just speculative hot potatoes. Now, 𝗕𝗪𝗪 acknowledges that most analysts kind of hyping $1,000 hold bags of XRP themselves, so sprinkle salt on every single forecast. Yet, he also kind of wants to remind us that early investors in Amazon, they looked wild when the stock crashed 95% in 2001. But history painted them kind of geniuses later. So let's zoom out. Why should you, the average viewer juggling bills, care about banks shaving milliseconds off of transfers? Well, it's actually because the hidden fees that banks pay eventually actually tumble onto your fees, right? International remittances still bleed up to 7% on corridor averages, right? If XRP shatters that down to fractions of a cent, well, migrants keep more paychecks, e-commerce prices dip, small businesses expand reach, and your Uber driver in Dubai can settle earnings with his cousin in Lagos, without losing dinner money, right? Efficiency trickles down like cheaper phone plans once telecom monopolies kind of cracked. And regulations? Well, they're softening faster than ice cream in July. Right? The European Union carved out MiCA, right? The UK chases its digital pound roadmap, and the US, post-SEC Ripple kind of lawsuit, is drafting crypto payment clauses as we speak. Suddenly, boardrooms that once kind of viewed XRP as radioactive are calling Ripple for demos. Now, my buddy at a mid-sized remittance firm told me that their CFO has green-lit, to test XRP in Q3. 4 months ago, the compliance officer wouldn't even let the name appear in an email. That's how quickly kind of sentiment swings when legal fog lifts. The biggest turning point could be one flagship bank flipping the switch in public. Right? Remember when Tesla bought Bitcoin for its balance sheets and every CEO had to update their slides? Picture JP Morgan or HSBC announcing that they're routing a slice of their cross-border settlements through RippleNet. Now, the news alone could melt Twitter, right? Price might overshoot, correct, then climb in real volume, at least when real volume kind of really kicks in. That's the kind of crescendo that 𝗕𝗪𝗏 is kind of hinting at, a future where legacy rails fade quietly into the rearview mirror while a lean, neutral bridge asset handles the grunt work. Now I can practically hear the keyboard warriors warming up. But what about the escrow? Won't Ripple be flooding the market and crash the price? But here's the rundown, right? Ripple unlocks 1 billion XRP each month and has historically re-escrowed the majority. In fact, on average over the last quarter, it's been 80% re-locked up. Now they want a healthy ecosystem, not a pump and dump. And if institutional demand does indeed spike, those tokens are the liquidity hose that everyone will be begging for. So think of it as oil reserves. Unused barrels don't depress prices if consumption outruns supply. Another curveball, central bank digital currencies. Some fear CBDCs will make XRP obsolete. Yet Ripple's been demoing private ledgers for CBDCs and interoperate with XRP as a bridge. Now, it's not an either or, it's more like USB-C ports in laptops, right? You still need a cable to plug gadgets into the global hub. XRP could be that universal cable. Now, of course, nothing is guaranteed. A rogue regulation, a hacked exchange, or a fat-figured coder could spark chaos, right? 𝗕𝗪𝗏 even joked on air that if aliens land tomorrow and gift us free quantum teleportation of value, all bets are of course off. But bearing extraterrestrial kind of disruption, the momentum feels palatable here, right? We're kind of watching an aging mainnet or mainframe square up against a sprinter wearing rocket shoes. Historically, rocket shoes win eventually. So where does this leave us? Well, in my opinion, the story isn't about Moonboy price tags. It's about an industry inching, or at least itching for a tech overhaul, right? Swift may not vanish overnight, but the writing is on the wall here, right? Whether XRP hits $10 or $1,000, the real victory is actually in tearing down, friction that costs businesses billions and immigrants, groceries. If XRP even partially succeeds, right, early believers could ride one of the wildest wealth transfers since the internet IPO days. And if it fails, At least it kind of shoved the conversation forward and forced banks to modernize, right? Disruption rarely leaves the world the same way. Now, grab a mental sticky note. Watch for final courtroom filings over the next few months. If the settlement truly sticks, watch how fast pilot programs explode. And if you want front row seats to that fireworks show, hop into our free crypto Discord. There's a link waiting in the description down below, right? We dissect charts, we share rumors, and yes, tease each other about who kind of panic sold too early, right? Community beats FOMO every single time. All right, quick recap before I let you all escape, right? Patrick Bet David projects $10 trillion caps if XRP soaks up 10% of Swift's flows. Now, Ripple execs kind of tout lightning fast settlements and near zero error rates. The SEC cloud could, look like it's finally clearing, right? Banks hate fees and love speed. The battleground is kind of set here. The underdog's kind of lacing up his shoes, and the incumbent's still trying its shoes on, right? Stay alert. And this might be one of those kind of rare moments when finance history kind of flips pages right in front of us.